The 10,003rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General, distinguished President, ministers, and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Egypt, Kuwait, Norway, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following to participate in this meeting: His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abul Hayt, Secretary General of the League of Arab States, and Her Excellency Ms. Kaya Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and Vice President of the European Commission. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we are confronting one of the darkest chapters of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Nearly 2 years after the horrific Hamas terror attacks of 7 October and the devastating Israeli military response that followed, the violence has only deepened across the occupied Palestinian territory, with grave threats to regional and global peace and security. The Israeli military onslaught in Gaza City is compounding an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Countless Palestinian civilians and the remaining hostages are trapped under relentless bombardment and deprived of food, water, electricity, and medicine. Famine is a reality, with the population constantly forced to move and being starved. To call this situation untenable and morally and legally indefensible does not begin to capture the scale of human suffering. I have repeatedly appealed for an immediate permanent ceasefire, the immediate unconditional release of all hostages, and the immediate unconditional and unhindered humanitarian access. UN resolutions continue to be ignored, international humanitarian law violated, impunity prevails, and our collective credibility is being undermined. The violence is spreading from Gaza into the occupied West Bank and beyond, including several countries in the region and recently even Qatar. Efforts to secure a ceasefire and hostage release deal led by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States suffered a serious blow on 9 September. The Israeli attack was not only a violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity, It also threatened the very norms and mechanisms we rely on for diplomacy and conflict resolution. Excellencies, the viability of a two-state solution is steadily eroding, now reaching its most critical level in more than a generation. Relentless settlement expansion, de facto annexation, forced displacement. Cycles of deadly violence, including by extremist settlers, have entrenched an unlawful Israeli occupation and pushed us perilously close to a point of no return. Israel's recent approval of settlement construction in the EU1 area is especially alarming. If implemented, it would sever the occupied West Bank, it would sever the occupied West Bank, destroying the territorial contiguity of a Palestinian state. Israeli settlements are not just a political issue, they are a flagrant violation of international law. At the same time, the Palestinian Authority is facing an existential crisis. Fiscal, political, and institutional pressures are undermining its ability to function. Israel's withholding of clearance revenues, the suffocation of the Palestinian economy, and the sharp decline in donor aid have left the Palestinian Authority unable to pay salaries or deliver basic services. Urgent international support, financial and political, is needed to stabilize the Palestinian Authority and preserve its viability as a partner for peace. And yet, amid the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged yesterday with the resumption of the high-level international conference on a two-state solution. I commend France and Saudi Arabia for co-chairing this important meeting and for helping to reignite political momentum. I welcome the recognition of Palestinian statehood by many more countries, including permanent members of the Council, France and the United Kingdom. This is the clearest path to a two-state solution. Israel and an independent, sovereign, democratic, viable and contiguous state of Palestine, living side by side in peace and security on the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states, based on international law and UN resolutions. We must seize this momentum. The so-called day after in Gaza must be anchored in international law, reject any form of ethnic cleansing, and have a clear political horizon towards a viable two-state solution. As I said to the General Assembly this morning, we must urgently reverse the dangerous trends on the ground. Relentless settler expansion and violence and the looming threat of annexation must stop. The calls of the International Court of Justice must be heeded, including for Israel to immediately cease settlement activities and end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. The illegal occupation must end. And we must support Palestinian institutions politically and financially to carry out essential reforms and ensure fiscal stability.
Excellencies, a just and lasting peace will never be built through more violence. Peace demands a collective commitment to diplomacy, to international law, to the dignity of all people. There are actions that the Security Council must take. There are responsibilities each member of this council must uphold. We cannot let this fragile moment slip away. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. I thank again the Secretary General for his briefing. It is yet another stark reminder that the situation in Gaza stands as one of the gravest challenges to international peace and security. The immense scale of human suffering and the implications for regional stability demand our urgent and united attention. This is not an abstract challenge, but measured in lives lost every day. Nearly 2 years have passed since Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7, 2023. In that time, more than 64,000 people have been killed. The humanitarian crisis worsens each day, with people in Gaza, particularly women, children, and other vulnerable groups facing constant threats to their lives and safety. Equally troubling is the famine now unfolding in Gaza. According to the recent IPC report, more than 500,000 people are already facing famine. The crisis is projected to spread to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis in the coming weeks. We must prevent any further devastation for civilians already in desperate conditions. Safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access must be guaranteed without any further delay. We call for the immediate lifting of all restrictions on the entry and distribution of humanitarian assistance. Excellencies, the Republic of Korea is deeply alarmed by Israel's ground operation to seize control of Gaza City, which risks further exacerbating an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. We are also gravely concerned that its decision to resume construction in the E1 settlement area would threaten to isolate Palestinian communities in the area. Given the dire situation, upholding international law, in particular international humanitarian law, is imperative. These rules are not aspirational ideals, but binding obligations designed to safeguard human dignity, even in the darkest moments of conflict. We urge all parties to comply fully with these principles. In this difficult context, the Republic of Korea remains gravely concerned about Israel's recent attack in Qatari territory. This act is unacceptable. It not only violates the territorial sovereignty of the state of Qatar, one of the key mediating countries, but also jeopardizes ongoing negotiations to achieve an immediate ceasefire and secure the release of all hostages held by Hamas. We reaffirm our full support for the tireless mediation efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. We commend the unwavering commitment of Qatar's diplomatic mediation, which remains indispensable to ending the cycle of violence and creating a pathway toward stability. The Republic of Korea also reiterates its steadfast call for an immediate ceasefire and the unconditional release of all hostages. Securing their freedom, together with establishing a permanent and fully respected ceasefire, are indispensable steps towards a just and lasting peace. Excellencies, the Republic of Korea deeply understands the Palestinian people's aspiration to establish their own state. We believe that the two-state solution is the only viable pathway to resolve the Israel-Palestinian issue and to build lasting peace. The Korean government will continue to play its due role in the international community's growing efforts to build peace and stability in the region based on the two-state solution. Taking all considerations into account, Korea is committed to recognizing Palestinian statehood at a time when it would be genuinely conducive to realizing the two-state solution. As we deliberate today, let us not lose sight of our common goal, a Middle East where peoples of all walks of life can coexist in peace, security, and prosperity. Korea stands ready to contribute to alleviating civilian suffering, upholding the principles of international law, and helping to lay the firm foundations of a just and enduring peace for all. I now resume my functions as the President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Ishaq Dar, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting. I welcome the participation of all distinguished ministers joining this important discussion today. I also thank Secretary General for his valuable briefing and thoughtful remarks. The Secretary General's voice has always been of wisdom and compassion in Palestine and beyond. To promote peace and alleviate human sufferings, we salute this dedication and devotion, Mr. Secretary General. Mr. President, we meet today in the shadow of a profound and deeply troubling tragedy. The Palestinian people are enduring unimaginable suffering, an unbearable daily toll of human lives, the destruction of homes and neighborhoods, and the obliteration of essential infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and markets lie in ruins. Roads and utilities have been shattered. The very fabric of society has torn apart. Over 64,000 lives have been lost, and over 100,000 have been injured. These are not mere statistics. They were grieving mothers, anguished fathers, suffering children, and revered elders. The devastation is immense. The grief is immeasurable. The world must not remain silent. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has reached catastrophic proportions. Starvation grips the population, and famine has taken hold. According to the latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) analysis, famine is now a reality in Gaza City, putting over 500,000 people at grave risk. In Khan Yunis and Deir al-Bala, famine looms imminently, threatening countless more lives. The ongoing military operations in Gaza City inflict a relentless toll. Dozens of Palestinians are killed each day, entire families displaced, and communities torn apart. Already, 300,000 people have been uprooted, and nearly 1 million face imminent displacement. The roar of fighter jets, the plumes of smoke from tank fire, and the collapse of buildings. What must this relentless violence mean for women, children, and the most vulnerable? And what of the hostages caught in the crossfire, whose lives hang in the balance? Mr. President, in the West Bank, illegal settlement expansion continues unabated. The latest E1 plan is grave violation of international law and relevant UN resolutions, as well as a stark manifestation of settler colonialism in the 21st century, a blow to the two-state solution. Mr. President, the time for action is upon us. Pakistan calls for the following urgent and concrete measures. 1. An immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire to halt the bloodshed and prevent further loss of lives. 2. Full, unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza and the immediate lifting of the blockade to allow life-saving aid to reach those who are in need. 3. A categoric end to any forced displacement of Palestinians from their lands, while upholding the right of return for refugees in accordance with the international law and establishing an international protection mechanism. And, Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for dignity, justice, and self-determination through the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Pakistan welcomes the two-state solution conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We also commend the recent recognitions of the State of Palestine by numerous member states, a step that reflects adherence to justice and the principle of international law. Pakistan had the honor to be among the first few countries to recognize the State of Palestine following the Declaration of Independence in 1988. This positive momentum must be sustained with resolute determination, seriousness of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to achieving a just and lasting solution. Mr. President, the people of Palestine are facing a crisis of historic proportion. Their suffering is a stain on our collective conscience. Gaza has become a graveyard for the humanity as well as for the global conscience. We call upon the Security Council and the broader international community to act decisively, to uphold human dignity, to ensure accountability and deliver justice. The time for words has passed. The time for action is now. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Dar for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Tanya Fayon, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia.
President, and I thank the Secretary General for his briefing and his personal commitment to this issue. Mr. President, upon entering the UN Security Council, Slovenia felt the heavy weight of responsibility of this council to uphold international peace and security, a weight that translates to upholding international law and rejecting double standards, choosing global benefit over national interests, being ready for difficult conversations with partners and instead of silence. Everyone who enters this Security Council or is a permanent member of this body should know that membership entails a responsibility to act. And it does not matter whether a threat to peace and security is unfolding in Ukraine or in Gaza. In both of these conflicts, international law is disregarded blatantly and red lines crossed persistently. Excellencies, this year we again witnessed immense numbers of deaths among civilians in armed conflicts, with many of them being women and children, lives shattered by starvation and displacement. Let us be reminded we have built a system that should prevent atrocities, and we promised a never again. Yet what we saw this year was a Security Council paralyzed by disrespect of this Council's resolutions and disregard of decisions of international courts. Colleagues, we should stand up to this. When politicians facing charges for war crimes and crimes against humanity are walking free, while judges are put under sanctions, we cannot afford to remain silent without becoming complacent. Let me be clear, when all rules and obligations of the international system we had constructed fail, this itself is a threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, Gaza has become a textbook example of failure of international community. It has become a place in which people dread the nightfall and fear what a new day will bring. Gaza has become the deadliest place for children, the deadliest place for humanitarian and medical workers, and the deadliest place for journalists. The place of first ever proclaimed famine in the Middle East, marked by continuous offensives and strikes against hospitals, schools, homes, shelters, and holy places. It is defined by death and despair, and where hostages suffer and civilians count heartbeats left. Gaza is a man-made catastrophe which is live-streamed across the globe and sustained by those acting in contradiction to everything we stand for. And Mr. President, existence of reasonable grounds to conclude or finding that acts may amount to genocide are threats to international peace and security. We commend the work of the judicial and investigative mechanisms, the ICG, the ICC, and the Commission of Inquiry, particularly for its latest report for sounding the alarm. It is not on us to question their findings, it is on us to act on them. And demands of a large majority of international community are not performative diplomacy. Calls for a ceasefire, irreversible political steps, and even simple expressions of solidarity are not stage-managed acts. They paint a dark picture of international community in despair, understanding that never again has become a failed promise. And Mr. President, the two-state solution is equally in a need of concrete and irreversible action. I welcome the new wave of countries recognizing the state of Palestine, and I call on others to take bold steps to recognize Palestine and normalize ties with both states. We must step up to prevent further disintegration of this vision and to counter occupation and annexation, forced displacement, human rights violations, and terrorism and extremism. Slovenia firmly supports the role of United Nations, including UNRWA, in addressing the ongoing crisis and in paving way to the two-state solution, and of the Palestinian Authority in carrying out reform and assuming full political ownership in the state of Palestine. And I appeal to all of us, do not let the future of Israeli people be defined by terrorism and violence. Do not let the future of Palestinian people be defined by occupation and perpetual human rights violations. And I appeal to you, do not let our collective future to be defined by the stain of the Gaza genocide. Act now. There is no bigger threat to international peace and security than a cycle of violence perpetrated by continuous fear, everlasting hate, and uncertain future. The stories of children starved to death, a threat of a population displaced, and a territory in fear should be all we need for us to understand that the time for the immediate, permanent, and unconditional ceasefire is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Fayon for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad, and African Affairs of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this session and for responding to the request of the Group of Islamic States in the Council. I also thank His Excellency, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his valuable briefing covering the recent developments in the Middle East. This region has become synonym to destruction and devastation, a synonym to injustice and oppression, a synonym to criminality in its harshest forms and manifestations. How can it not be so, while this region has known all these horrors horrors that no other region has known for successive generations. Without any exaggeration and without any qualifications, the situation there is self-telling, whether be it regarding the Palestinian cause, particularly, or the regional landscape in the Middle East in general. On the Palestinian level, we cannot deny anymore that Gaza, and for more than 2 years, have been witnessing a full-fledged genocidal war. This has been confirmed by the UN Commission of Inquiry. And there is no doubt today that famine is indeed occurring in Gaza after our organization has confirmed famine in Gaza officially. There is also no room for interpreting the designs for displacement, reoccupation, and the annexation of Gaza and the West Bank after the Israeli occupation started implementing these designs and announcing them blatantly and brazenly. On the regional level, the Israeli aggressions continue unabated. An Israeli aggression against Yemen, followed by an Israeli aggression against Lebanon, then an Israeli aggression against Syria, followed by an Israeli aggression on Iran. And a few days ago, yet another Israeli aggression against the state of Qatar. Needless to say that this list might expand even further following the threats against other countries in the region. This is the unjust and tragic situation that the Israeli occupation is trying to entrench. The Israeli occupation is opening new fronts of aggression, one front after the other. This council does not have to solve riddles anymore, now that the Israeli occupation itself is boasting about its achievements. The Israeli aggression is first aiming at undermining any prospect for the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, not on the ground alone, but also in the minds of people, if possible. Second, the Israeli occupation aims at redrawing the borders in the region based on its imagination and its illusions, basing itself on the most dangerous myth, which is the myth of Greater Israel. Third and last, the Israeli occupation aims at entrenching its absolute monopoly over the region and at having the final say in that region, to attack whomever they want, whenever they want, and however they want. They give no regard to international law, nor to the UN Charter, and not even to the merest rules and customs related to civilized coexistence. Beyond all that, the Israeli occupation dares to promote their lies. They say that the Palestinians want them out, while they deny their right to exist, their right to life, and their right to build their own independent sovereign state. The Israeli occupation dares to promote their propaganda, claiming that they are alone, surrounded by enemies who want to destroy them, while they have been acting arrogantly against all the countries of the region. In addition to all the above, the Israeli occupation is claiming to be a shrine for democracy and the rule of law in the region, while they have proved for the whole world that they are the greatest danger to right and to law, and that they are the gravest threat threatening security and stability in the region and international peace and security. The tragedies and horrors that the Middle East is facing today require us to reconsider peace and security in the region and to approach them differently from a more comprehensive perspective that accepts no fragmentation. The issue of security in the Middle East did not start on the 7th of October 2023 in order to be associated and reduced to that date. That would be unjust and biased. The history of the region runs parallel to the history of this organization. It proves that the Palestinian cause remains the central cause that cannot be obliterated, that cannot be ignored, and cannot be marginalized. Today, we see for ourselves how attempts at liquidating this cause only added to its legitimacy and made it the most just cause on the planet. The history of the region is carved into the resolution of this Council. This history proves that there is no alternative to the two-state solution and to the establishment of the State of Palestine along the borders of 1967 with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. This is the just, lasting, and final settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis or conflict. Today, we also see for ourselves how the designs to obliterate this state only made it more resolute through the diplomatic recognitions. Algeria welcomes these recognitions and calls for strengthening them in order to grant the Palestinian state full membership in our organization. The history of the organization is also rooted in international legitimacy. This history proves that there is no alternative to putting a final end to the exceptional, unjust treatment granted to the Israeli occupation, including impunity, non-accountability, and no punishment. And today, we also see for ourselves how the overwhelming majority of the member states believe in the importance of dissuasion and accountability for those who believe that they are above all the rules, regulations, and laws that others are respecting. Furthermore, the history of the region also shows that security and stability in the Middle East will not be achieved if our Council does not shoulder its responsibilities. The fate of the Palestinian cause and the fate of the Palestinian people, the fate of all the countries and peoples of the region, all these fates depend on the will of this Council and on the Council's ability to impose the respect of its resolution, to impose the respect of international legitimacy, and its ability to dissuade all violations and to end impunity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Musa Timothy Kaba, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I thank His Excellency Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting at the request of Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, Pakistan, and Sierra Leone. I also thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his important briefing. My delegation commends the principled leadership of the UN Secretary General and the work of the UN teams in the field. Mr. President, the overall situation in the Middle East remains fragile and evolving. However, while some areas such as Lebanon and Syria are experiencing significantly less violence than before, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in contrast, are in very dire circumstances, with civilians enduring over 23 months of unimaginable and increasing violence. We recall the attack by Hamas and other armed groups of 7th October 2023 that led to the killing and taking of hostages of Israeli civilians, and reiterate our unequivocal condemnation of that heinous action, especially the taking of hostages. Sierra Leone further recalls that since the start of this conflict, the Council has remained seized of this subject, having received extensive briefings on the prevailing security, humanitarian, and political situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We regret that effort by this Council and the mediators to secure a deal that allows for the cessation of hostilities have been met with challenges. In this regard, we have concluded, along with other member states, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be resolved by peaceful means and that the military option is not viable. The atrocities committed on and since the attacks of 7th October 2023 highlight the urgency of finding a comprehensive and lasting solution to this long-standing conflict. Sierra Leone remains dedicated to supporting international efforts toward a political, just, and comprehensive settlement that ends the occupation, stops settlement expansion, and addresses extremism and terrorism. Sierra Leone is gravely concerned that the continuation of this war deepens despair among civilians in the Gaza Strip and the hostages held by Hamas. With intensified hostilities, significant loss of life, destruction of critical civilian infrastructure, blockades, and evacuation orders, the civilians in the Gaza Strip, including women and children, have borne the brunt of this war. The current status quo is unacceptable, as it is unbearable for the civilians with no seeming hope of survival. This is a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter, the provisions of international humanitarian law, and Security Council resolutions. Guided by the UN Charter, international law, and the rule of law, we emphasize the following key points. First, a complete cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and an irreversible political process leading to a permanent ceasefire. The parties to the conflict must recommit to ongoing peace efforts and take concrete steps that will prevent further atrocities. We acknowledge and commend the efforts of the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, and the United States to achieve this end. Second, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Israeli civilians held by Hamas and Palestinian detainees held without due process. The immediate and unconditional lifting of the aid restrictions and restoration of full and unhindered humanitarian access. We emphasize the role of the United Nations and its partners, including UNRWA, to achieve this end. Third, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering support for the two-state solution based on relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1812 of 1947, and consistent with Article 4, Sub 1 of the United Nations Charter. We welcome the endorsement by the General Assembly of the New York Declaration and reaffirm the legitimacy of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, including their right to an independent and sovereign state over the entire occupied Palestinian territory, in line with international law and agreed parameters. Fourth, Sierra Leone supports Israel's right to exist in peace and security, free from threats and attacks. Accordingly, we urge all armed groups to disarm and renounce violence, paving the way for the demilitarization of the Palestinian territory. Sustainable peace cannot take root while armed groups continue to operate outside the law. We deplore and reject any attempt to forcibly displace Palestinians from their land. Palestinians temporarily evacuated must be allowed to return to their homes at the earliest opportunity. Finally, Mr. President, we emphasize the need for the Palestinian Authority to be fully empowered and supported politically, financially, and administratively to enable it to continue implementing its credible reform agenda. As we celebrate the 88th session of the United Nations, let us reflect on the principles on which this very institution was built. Among its core values is to promote peace, justice, and the dignity of all persons. We must exercise the political will to deliver peace to the Palestinians and Israelis. Ongoing international efforts are a positive step that must be fully leveraged by both parties in good faith. The time to act is now in order to save the Palestinian people from the scourge of war. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kappa for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Hilton Todd, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana.
Mr. President, as a member state of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, OIC, Guyana thanks you for facilitating the group's request for convening today's meeting. I also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his remarks and for his consistent and principled advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people and for peace in the Middle East region. Mr. President, the protracted Israeli aggression against Palestine cannot continue to be a defining feature for the politics in the Middle East. In recent times, the aggression has extended to other countries in the region, heightening instability and insecurity, driving Israeli poles away from its neighbors and undermining good neighborliness. The ongoing war in Gaza has itself become a catalyst of pain and pressure. Pain for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are the targets of Israelis' instruments of war, starvation, bombs, bullets, displacements, dispossession, and other cruelties solely intended to subjugate the Palestinian nation. We have seen, for example, how famine unfolded in Gaza in full view of the international community, and 192 countries, could not stop it. The war in Gaza has also become a catalyst for pressure, political pressure, which seems to be the only way the occupying power might respond to the international outcry against the genocidal acts being perpetuated against Palestinians. Guyana calls on the member states of the United Nations to ensure that their engagements with the State of Israel do not in any way contribute to prolonging the war in Gaza and the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. It took a collective effort to dismantle the system of apartheid in South Africa, and Guyana firmly believes that an equally strong and organized international response is needed to ensure the end of the occupation of the Palestinian territory. I must underscore the importance of recognition of the State of Palestine by all UN member states as a pivotal part of forcing an end to the Israeli occupation. Recognition lends greater strength to international efforts to end the occupation and to achieve an independent Palestine. On the question of the occupation, Mr. President, allow me to recall that more than 1 year ago, the International Court of Justice issued its advisory opinion confirming that Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian territory is illegal under international law and must be brought to an end. The General Assembly later demanded that Israel end its occupation within a year. That is by the 18th of September 2025. That date has now passed without compliance on Israel's part. On the contrary, we have instead witnessed a series of developments that only entrench the occupation further and destroy the two-state solution. Ghana calls on Israel to respect the Charter of the United Nations, to abide by the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and other organs of the United Nations, to cease its contempt of international law, and to commit to true peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, the occupation of the Palestinian territory and the attendant ills is a historic tragedy of proportions that should shock the human conscience across the globe. Sadly, however, what we are witnessing is an othering of the Palestinian people that makes it difficult for some to see Palestinian people as they see their own people. We must all reject the othering and fight for the rights of the Palestinian people, as we would fight for the rights of our own people. The right-minded, the peace-loving, and the promoters of justice must continue to defend the Palestinian people and oppose all attempts to erase them from their homeland. I conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Ghana's continued commitment to the two-state solution and by underscoring our conviction that the rule of law will ultimately prevail in the decades-long question as long as all member states choose to be guided by the principles of the Charter. I also reiterate the calls we have consistently made over the last 2 years for a ceasefire in Gaza. For the release of all hostages held in Gaza and Palestinian detainees held in Israeli prisons, for the unimpeded humanitarian access in Gaza. I also call on Israel to cease all its actions that are dismantling the two-state solution and the possibility of peace in the Middle East region. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Todt for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I want to thank Mr. Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting. And I also want to thank the Secretary General for his very insightful briefing. Through the chaos of this abhorrent war, he has consistently raised his voice and that of United Nations in support of peace, and Denmark commend this kind of leadership. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the tireless efforts and sacrifice of the UN staff on the ground. Colleagues, I'm speaking to you today not only as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, and by so a politician responsible to the people of Denmark, but also as a member of this Council responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, and as a grandfather, responsible to my grandchildren, who I'm totally convinced one day will ask what I did, what we did, in the face of such immense suffering. Colleagues, I ask you today, how will we answer them? That we stepped up and met the challenge of peace, or that we idled in inaction and watched helplessly as the horrors unfolded? Mr. President, nearly 2 years have passed since the war in Gaza began. It was unleashed by the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on the October 7th, an attack that tore through Israeli families, that left parents without children, children without parents, a nation wounded to its core, hostages and their families going through unimaginable suffering. Denmark has condemned this attack in the strongest terms possible, and we will continue to do so, just as we will continue to insist on the immediate and safe release of every hostage. Denmark considers itself as a long-standing friend of the people of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism. This I have always supported, and this I will continue to support. But friends also have to speak the truth to each other. And today we must face the fact that Israel's war in Gaza has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable scale. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The human suffering in Gaza must be brought to an end, and it must happen now. Tens of thousands of civilians have already been killed, including over 18,000 children. This constitutes a classroom of children every day. It constitutes a humanitarian and human failure of unprecedented scale. We are witnessing an ongoing expanding military operation in Gaza City. Children starving with no access to clean water or medicine. Doctors forced to amputate without sedation. Mothers powerless to feed their babies. A famine unfolding before our eyes. While the World Food Programme alone has enough food to feed Gaza for months waiting at the border. This is also why Denmark, on behalf of the E10, coordinated a resolution for this Council just last week. The resolution demanded a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and that the government of Israel immediately lift all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza in line with international humanitarian law. These are demands that the international community has reiterated on multiple occasions, including just yesterday in the General Assembly. And I deeply regret that the resolution did not receive the support of all 15 Council members. But today I restate these demands. Israel must change its course immediately. The war in Gaza must end. The Security Council, as the body responsible for international peace and security, should be able to make these demands. Indeed, this should be the bare minimum that we can do. But around this table, that means all of us, every single member, working in concert and common cause towards this goal. It means setting aside political differences to save lives. Last week, 14 members of this Council were willing to do this. We hope that this can soon become all 15. So to our American friends, just this morning, President Trump said that we have to stop the war in Gaza immediately. He said we have to negotiate immediately to negotiate for peace. Denmark continues to support the dedicated efforts of the US, Qatar, and Egypt to mediate a ceasefire. Your unwavering commitment to find a path to peace is critical in the context, but we count on you in this Council too. Your leadership is critical in our joint aspirations of bringing peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, I will conclude very soon. Denmark has consistently contributed to ease the suffering through humanitarian contributions. Together with 24 other countries and the EU, we have called on Israel to resume medical evacuations from Gaza to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and we stand ready to support the treatment of those patients. Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I visited the region, which I have done several times since 7 October. I have met with the Israeli families of hostages. The pain is real. The demand must be immediately and unconditionally answered. I also met with Palestinians in the West Bank who face checkpoints, settlements, settler violence, destroyed property and land grabbing, and their pain is real as well. The longing for freedom and dignity is evident. So, Mr. President, the two-state solution remains the only solution to lasting peace for two people, both deserving of security, both deserving of dignity. This was confirmed during the high-level conference on the two-state solution yesterday. It is clear that the momentum is growing, that we are witnessing a renewed energy and enthusiasm for peace based on the two-state solution, a solution that Denmark is prepared to build on. And this is why I said yesterday, and that I repeat today, the keys to recognition of the Palestinian state should no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. The time for the end of this decade's-long struggle is now. The only path to lasting peace is the two-state solution for both Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rasmussen for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Yvette Cooper, MP, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Can I thank the President today and also the Secretary General for the briefing at the beginning of this crucial session. Yesterday, alongside other ministers here in New York this week, I hosted a session to hear from doctors who have recently returned from Gaza. And the stories they told would stay with me forever. One told of the screams of toddlers and the scream of a toddler who she had operated on without full anesthetics, and how she hoped and prayed that he would not feel pain. Another told of the seriously malnourished pregnant women affecting their babies, and they talked about doctors and nurses whose family members were killed but who still came back to work in hospitals in unimaginable conditions to help others. And they told of how the absolute basics of modern medicine, like antibiotics and anesthetics, things that we around this council table take for granted for ourselves and our loved ones, were unavailable, blocked and denied. And we say the words humanitarian crisis, but this is what it means, the pain and the screams of a toddler who cannot get the basic health care that they need. And only 18 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza now remain open, all of them struggling to operate amid severe shortages of fuel, medicine, equipment and staff. Over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, more than 300 detained. This is what the catastrophic collapse of Gaza's healthcare system looks like. And as we are gathered here, Israeli forces are escalating the conflict in Gaza City, pounding more homes into rubble, sending frightened families scattering. It is incomprehensible, it is inhumane, it is utterly unjustifiable, and it must end. All that this action from the Israeli government will do is make a catastrophic humanitarian situation worse. More healthcare in crisis, harder than ever to get desperately needed aid to those who need it, more innocent children enduring a man-made famine, more civilians killed, but making it harder to get the remaining hostages out. hostages who are still being held, who were seized by Hamas on the barbaric terrorist attack of October the 7th, and are still being held in the most horrendous conditions, prolonging the anguish for their families. And I reiterate our condemnation of Hamas and that barbaric terrorism in October the 7th. I met with some of the UK-linked hostage families again last week. Their ask of all of us is to keep the hostages at the forefront of our minds, to do everything we can to give their loved ones the chance of coming home and to achieve a ceasefire that gives them the chance to do that. And that must be our task. We know what needs to be done. We need a ceasefire now. We need the release of all the hostages. We need the immediate restoration of aid and support for medical care, and we need a broader framework for the lasting peace. And I welcome and support mediation efforts being made by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt to seek an end to conflict and to seek peace. We know too that Gaza cannot be seen in isolation from the West Bank. The Israeli government is tightening its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy and continuing to approve illegal settlement construction, including just recently in the E1 area of East Jerusalem, which is a further blow to the viability of a two-state solution. And we urge Israel to reverse these plans. After 2 years of bloodshed, I believe the world is united in wanting this awful war to end, united in wanting all the hostages released, united in rejection of any role for Hamas in the future of Gaza or the future of a Palestinian state, united in wanting Israel to unblock aid and end the humanitarian catastrophe, and united in wanting a better and more peaceful future for the region, with the reconstruction of Gaza, the dignity for its people, and a new era of relations to support their collective security. And that future must be based on a two-state solution. The UK's historic recognition of the state of Palestine this week is part of our commitment to peace, part of acting to protect the viability of the two-state solution as the only path to a just and lasting peace and to security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, part of rejecting extremist ideas on all sides, which involve too often fantasies of the destruction of the state of Israel or expulsion of the Palestinian population. We reject both of those, and part of our wider effort to work with partners on a long-term peace, not just to halt the immediate crisis, but an advance and a pragmatic plan for what comes next. None of this can happen without an immediate ceasefire, and that is where all of this has to start. One of the doctors yesterday described the impact on children of growing up in trauma and devastation. And those will be the consequences on generations to come if we do not act now. We owe it to all of those children growing up in Gaza, across Palestine, across Israel. We owe it to all of them to build a better future. The time for peace is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Cooper for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Georgios Gerapatritis, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you personally for convening this important meeting today at a very critical moment for the Middle East. Distinguished colleagues, what we have been witnessing in the Gaza Strip, words fail to describe. The humanitarian catastrophe is ongoing. For almost 2 years, the civilian population has endured conditions that are unsustainable and deeply concerning. No one should be compelled to live under such circumstances. The expansion of military operations in the city of Gaza has led to further displacement and risks, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. This reality endangers civilian lives. Any further escalation in Gaza, which worsens the already dramatic situation for civilians, must be avoided. The plight of children underscores the urgent need to guarantee safe, unhindered, and sustained humanitarian access at scale to all parts of Gaza, in full respect of international law and international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Greece is actively engaged in all efforts to alleviate the suffering of the people in Gaza. We have consistently provided humanitarian assistance. We have already welcomed injured children from Gaza for treatment in Greek hospitals. On another strand of effort, we voted in favor of every draft resolution that would address the crisis in Gaza, the latest demanding the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. And this past May, I stood alongside the representatives of 80 UN members here in New York, reaffirming the significance of protecting civilians in armed conflicts. Humanitarian access is crucial to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian population. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines throughout the territory must be guaranteed, and international humanitarian law must be respected. Initiatives to expand deliveries in Gaza by land, air, or sea must be further strengthened. At the same time, hostages continue to suffer horribly at the hands of Hamas. We were appalled by the images and videos released last month showing 2 hostages visibly emaciated as they described the appalling conditions of their captivity. We reiterate our call for unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Mr. President, we recall that this Council has rightly addressed the recent strikes in Doha earlier this month, which are even more concerning given Qatar's crucial role in hosting and mediating negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas alongside the United States and Egypt. We continue to believe that diplomacy remains the most effective tool even in the most difficult circumstances. Greece has unwaveringly supported the negotiation efforts and will continue to do so. And we urge all parties to rise up to the gravity of the situation, return to the negotiating table as soon as possible, and be guided by international law. Mr. President, recent settlement expansion in the West Bank and settler violence further impair the prospects for peace. We express our profound concern over announcements on the construction of additional settlements in the E1 area of West Bank. Such plans, were they to be realized, would further undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. The escalation of settler violence, including against Christian communities, is a cause for grave alarm as well. It needs to stop now. Mr. President, however remote or difficult the prospect may seem today, the two-state solution remains the only viable path forward. We need to provide the Palestinian people with a credible prospect of hope for the future. This is an indispensable condition for peace, stability, and security in the region, including the long-term security of Israel. We appreciate in this vein the leadership demonstrated by France and Saudi Arabia in co-chairing the two-state solution conference. We stand by all international initiatives, including the relevant Global Alliance and the Arab Plan, towards realizing this vision. We will continue to contribute to every effort that revives the political process towards a two-state solution, a political process which we firmly believe must lead to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state through a revitalized and comprehensive approach, and which is essential for lasting peace and stability in the region. Against this backdrop, we see no role for Hamas, neither in governance nor in future discussions concerning the day after in Gaza. Therefore, Greece has repeatedly stressed that an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority must play a central role in Gaza's future and remains the best partner for peace. The European Union has already stepped up, approving a 3-year package worth around 1.6 billion euros, crucial to preventing fiscal collapse and enabling the Palestinian Authority to fulfill its task. Mr. President, to Greece, the stability of the Middle East is not an abstract concern. It is an indispensable necessity. as a country of Eastern Mediterranean, at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, developments in the region have a direct impact on our own security, prosperity, and stability, as well as on Europe as a whole. We are convinced that only through dialogue and the rule of international law, we can build a safer neighborhood, one where peoples can coexist in dignity and security. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gera Petritis for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Carlos Arturo Hoyos Boyd, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Señor Presidente.
President, Panama is grateful for the convening of this briefing at the request of the delegations of Algeria, Guyana, Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. We would also like to express our thanks to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, for his briefing, which strengthens this Council's obligation, in line with the United Nations Charter, to respond with unity and responsibility, given the scope of the catastrophic situation unfolding in the Palestinian territories. For more than 7 decades, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been characterized by a lack of political will to resolve its root causes, paving the way only to mistrust, extremism, and violence. The consequences of this lack of political will were brutally exposed on the 7th of October 2023, with the atrocious attacks carried out by Hamas, which we strongly condemn once again, and which claimed the lives of more than 1,200 people and kidnapped another 251 people, of whom it is believed that 20 are still alive, suffering in the darkness of tunnels, deprived of contact with their families and the most basic dignity. That episode only triggered a spiral of violence that led to an unprecedented war, given its scale of devastation in the Gaza Strip. More than 65,000 Palestinians, including 18,000 children, have died. Tens of thousands have been injured. Millions have been forcibly displaced from one side to the other, again and again, and entire communities have been reduced to rubble, leaving an indelible scar of suffering for thousands of families. In the 59 days that the ceasefire lasted for between January and March, it was possible to stop human suffering, to facilitate humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza, and to make progress in releasing the hostages. But since the ceasefire broke down, the catastrophic humanitarian situation has only got worse. More than 14,000 Palestinians have died and tens of thousands more have been injured. The hostages and their families continue to pay an unbearable price, trapped in uncertainty and suffering. As if violence were not enough, hunger is also claiming lives every day. The Integrated Food Security Classification has declared starvation in Gaza, famine in Gaza. More than 425 people, including 125 children, have died of hunger, not because there was a lack of food, but because of the obstacles preventing food from getting in. This tragedy has been exacerbated by the further development of the military operation in Gaza City, which is still inhabited by hundreds of thousands of people, and which has become the backdrop to intense bombing and land operations that have led to widespread displacement and dozens of deaths, including those of children. The devastation is also affecting essential services. Hospitals and health centers have been damaged, water supply systems, sanitation systems are collapsed, and there is extreme danger for those who are trying to save lives or tell the truth about what is happening. Humanitarian staff and journalists, of whom hundreds have been victims of the violence, nevertheless continue to carry out their work in unbearable conditions and under constant threat. No goal can justify using methods that violate international law or the protection of human life. That is why Panama once again calls for an immediate, sustainable ceasefire. We also call for the immediate, dignified, unconditional release of all of the hostages and safe, sufficient, unhindered access for vital humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. These are the basic conditions of humanity that cannot be put off any longer. President, the crisis is not limited to Gaza either. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, violence has reached alarming levels. Land fragmentation, insecurity, and a lack of prospects are undermining the possibility of any sustainable political solution. This year alone, more than 186 Palestinians and 16 Israelis have lost their lives in incidents in this area as a result of the conflict intensifying. This is in addition to hundreds of people who've been injured and thousands of people affected by restrictions that are conditioning their everyday life. The military operations and widespread detentions have displaced entire families, including children and older persons, while further closures and obstacles are threatening to isolate communities and cut off access to schools, hospitals, and workplaces, which is making an already unsustainable situation even worse. In addition to this, the recent unacceptable incident in Qatar, which we unequivocally condemn, reiterates the need to put an end to this conflict before it escalates any further. President, Panama reiterates that there is no military solution to this conflict, only a serious, comprehensive, and sustained political process based on international law and on the relevant resolutions of this Council, which allows Israelis and Palestinians to live in security and dignity within internationally recognized borders and with guaranteed rights and with verifiable guarantees for both. That is the only solution. That is the only possible way to put an end to decades of suffering and to pave the way to reconciliation. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hoyos Boyd for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Korean presidency for convening this meeting based on the request from the OIC members of this council. I would like to welcome all the distinguished ministers participating in this meeting today. I would also like to express our gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, we remain gravely concerned about the continued escalation of Israeli military operations in Gaza. As we speak, these military operations are expanding rapidly, and for the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, it's a death sentence, literally and figuratively. Since this war began, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Last month's IPC report has removed all doubts about what's happening in Gaza. Famine is no longer looming. It is taking place now. It is taking place now in front of our all eyes. The death of children from hunger and disease is not a forecast. It's a daily reality. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a man-made disaster created through siege, blockade, and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, and the use of hunger as a collective punishment is a grave violation of international law. We must act with moral clarity. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion unequivocally reaffirmed the legal obligations of all states regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. These obligations are binding and they must be enforced. The blatant disregard for these binding decisions, including the provisional measures issued in January and March of this year, is a direct challenge to the international legal order. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. It's clear that there is no military solution to this conflict. Somalia recognizes and supports the ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt, and commends their unwavering commitment. The Israeli airstrikes on residential areas in Doha, the capital of Qatar, on September 9th mark a grave and perilous escalation. It's appalling that this military airstrike unfolded when negotiators were engaged in talks over a US-backed ceasefire proposal. We stress that mediators must not be targeted, but they should be protected to ensure a pathway to peace remains viable. Second, my delegation calls for the immediate and full restoration of humanitarian access for all UN agencies, including UNRWA, throughout Gaza. Israel, as the occupying power, bears the legal responsibility under international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Somalia reiterates its call for the immediate release of all arbitrary detainees to return to their families and loved ones. Third, we must revive a credible political track towards the recognition of the State of Palestine as full member of the United Nations, and stress the importance of the unification of Gaza and West Bank under a single Palestinian Authority. We call for international support for the reconstruction and development in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. There's no doubt that addressing the root causes of the conflict begins with the end of the occupation and the establishment of a sovereign, independent state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. In that regard, we welcome the resumption of the two-state solution conference co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We commend the states who have recognized the state of Palestine and urge others to do so. Mr. President, to conclude, Somalia reaffirms its commitment to working with all partners toward a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, in line with international law and advancing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking the Secretary General of the United Nations for his briefing and his commitment to supporting the two-state solution in favor of peace and security for Israel and Palestine. Yesterday, from the podium of the United Nations General Assembly at the Conference for the Two-State Solution, the President of the French Republic forcefully reminded us of what unites us: the urgency of ending the war in Gaza and giving peace a real chance. Today, at the Security Council, it is our collective responsibility to translate this demand into concrete decisions. Mr. President, France unequivocally condemns the terrorist attacks of October 7th, 2023. Nothing can justify terrorism. France also condemns the brutal attacks on innocent lives in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of human beings have been plunged into hunger, fear, and mourning. France also rejects the unacceptable prospect of the forced displacement of the Gazan population. The expansion of the Israeli military offensive into Gaza City over the past week only inflicts further suffering on the population of Gaza. It is our duty to build a realistic alternative, faithful to our values and in accordance with international law. As famine continues to gain ground in the Gaza Strip. France is deeply concerned that this council failed to reach agreement last Thursday to call for a response to the humanitarian emergency. France's message is clear. All lives are equally valuable and all lives must be protected. The immediate and unconditional release of hostages still held by Hamas is a priority. This demand must go hand in hand with a permanent ceasefire in Gaza to end the suffering of the population in Gaza and allow for the safe, large-scale, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, yesterday, the President of the French Republic announced France's recognition of the State of Palestine. This gesture reflects a profound conviction: the security of Israel and justice for the Palestinians are inseparable. They can only be guaranteed through the coexistence of two sovereign and democratic states living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as their capital. This decision, shared by many other countries, opens a political path that we must consolidate. This path is structured around a roadmap, the New York Declaration, which France, along with Saudi Arabia and many partners, submitted and had adopted by the General Assembly, thanks to the support of 142 states. This roadmap is based on two essential stages. The first, the emergency phase, aims to secure the release of hostages, the cessation of hostilities, and large-scale humanitarian access. We call on all parties concerned to resume negotiations as soon as possible and in good faith. In this regard, we commend the tireless mediation efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. The second stage is stabilization and reconstruction. A transitional administration excluding Hamas must be established in Gaza under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, supported by the international community. It must ensure security, undertake the effective disarmament of Hamas, and address the urgent needs of the population. France, together with its European partners, stands ready to contribute, including through participation in an international stabilization mission to be decided by this Council at the appropriate time. This process also requires renewed and reformed Palestinian governance, fully implementing the commitments made. It also requires clear choices from Israel in favor of negotiation and respect for international law. The European Union, along with France, will condition its future cooperation on these commitments. Mr. President, the alternative is simple. Either we preserve the possibility of two states, and with it, peace, or we allow a permanent conflict to take hold with disastrous consequences for the region and beyond. France calls on this Council to act with the determination and sense of responsibility that is incumbent upon it. History will judge our ability to seize this moment. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find it, and we find it deeply regrettable that Council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. And frankly, colleagues, it's a testament to how this Council has prioritized a lot of performance over serious efforts to actually advance peace. Serious efforts that President Trump, Secretary Rubio, his team, and partners like Egypt and Qatar are engaged in right now as we speak, to end this horrific war. There have been over 80 Council meetings on this issue since October 7th. The main outcome of these meetings, unfortunately, has been to embolden Hamas, to undermine and disrupt negotiations that are aimed at freeing all of the hostages and ending the war and ending the suffering that we all want to end. Unspoken today, in the last 2 weeks alone, Israel has suffered two terrorist attacks in Jerusalem on September 8th and at the Allenby border crossing on September 18th. We condemn these attacks. We offer condolences to the families of those killed. We call upon other countries to join us in a clear and explicit condemnation of this violence by Hamas and its ideological allies. And extremists like the terrorists who killed two IDF soldiers on September 18th have shown their utter contempt for the people of Gaza. Hamas has shown its utter contempt for the people of Gaza. They struck the very border crossing through which nearly half of all aid delivered to Gaza between May and September of this year has passed. Let me say again, Hamas struck the border crossing through which half of all aid through the better part of this year has passed. No country here would willingly allow terrorists like this to threaten its people. Israel should not be expected to be any different, and of course, has the right to defend itself from groups that wish to do it harm. As Secretary of State Rubio recently said, as long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East. And every member here has seen evidence of how Hamas has starved hostages, has tortured them. We've heard the testimony of freed hostages and what they've endured in captivity. And sadly, some endure still. We, the United States, again demand Hamas immediately release all 48 remaining hostages and their remains, cease putting civilians in harm's way, cease sacrificing their own people for propaganda aims, that they disarm, and that they surrender. This war could end today if that happened. But Hamas refuses. While Israel has accepted the negotiators' proposals, rewarding Hamas's refusal, whether with performative conferences or one-sided Security Council resolutions, colleagues, it undermines and it delays achieving the peace we all want. Unfortunately, yesterday's conference spoke to domestic audiences, but it will prolong this tragic war in Gaza, and it will prolong the suffering. Hamas stands emboldened today after that conference. We've rewarded its obstruction. We've undermined efforts to achieve peace in both the short and the long term. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. And at this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority leaders from Ramallah are absent from New York this week because they failed to meet their Oslo commitments. The commitments were basic, including renouncing terrorism, renouncing violence, resolving issues through direct negotiations with Israel. The Palestinian Authority has failed to clear even those low bars. And their attempts to bypass negotiations through what can only be called lawfare, including at the ICC and at the ICJ, and its pushes for unilateral recognition of statehood. This charade it's disappointing. It is clearly fueled by domestic politics and has given Hamas a reward for refusing to surrender, as well as an incentive. They're now incentivized to hold on, keep holding the hostages in subhuman conditions. We call on the Council membership and the UN to change its course, to focus instead onto how to prevent Hamas from ever doing this again and to how to eliminate them, on how they should free the hostages and create a framework so that Gaza can have a better future than the life, that the people of Gaza can have a better future than the life they have endured under terrorists. Secretary of State Rubio recently traveled to Israel and Qatar to address the threat posed by Hamas, to advance the immediate return of all hostages, and to ensure humanitarian aid actually reaches civilians. And the United States will continue working tirelessly towards those ends. And the Secretary was clear. The United States supports a negotiated settlement that will lead to the release of every single hostage. The President was clear today in the General Assembly to that same end. We must lead to the elimination of Hamas, and we must end the war. In the interim, the United States has worked to support the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza with actual meaningful results. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has securely delivered more than 170 million meals directly to civilians. We have also seen the increased flow of humanitarian aid, including through UN entities. However, looting and diversion is undeniable and remains serious problems that must be addressed. The UN's own data shows that approximately 85% of UN aid sent to Gaza since May 19th has been looted. Colleagues, the fighting must end so the international community can concentrate on the very hard work of building a new Gaza, one that embraces peace and coexistence and rejects terrorism and violence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Algeria, Guyana, Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia for their initiative to convene this meeting, and thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. President, the Palestinian question is at the core of the Middle East issue, bearing on the Middle East's peace and stability and global peace and security. Over 7 decades or so, the Palestinian-Israeli situation has time again fallen into turmoil and even led to the outbreak of wars, shaping the evolution of the international landscape and the development of international relations. Since the start of the current Gaza conflict, the Palestinian people have been deeply mired in suffering. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, among others, are witnessing escalating tensions, and even Qatar has come under attack. The mounting conflicts and volatility in the Middle East have worsened the global security environment, dampened the economic outlook for the world, and ran counter to the common interests of the international community. It is therefore imperative to accord this issue the utmost importance and accelerate the resolution of the Palestinian question, which lies at the heart of the current turmoil. I will make 4 points. First, we must bring an end to the tragedy in Gaza without delay. The conflicts of the past 2 years have devastated Gaza with scenes of misery and destruction everywhere, yet Israel is stepping up its military offensive, causing even greater civilian casualties and displacements. Military means are not the solution to the problem. An immediate ceasefire is the right way to save lives and bring hostages home. We urge Israel to cease all military actions in Gaza without delay, fulfill its occupying powers' obligations under international humanitarian law, and fully restore access for humanitarian supplies. Last week, the Security Council's draft resolution on Gaza was vetoed once again by a permanent member. With deep disappointment, we expect the relevant country to effectively shoulder its responsibility and make earnest efforts to end this war. Second, we must de-escalate tensions in the West Bank. Israel continues to expand settlements in the West Bank, forcibly demolish Palestinian structures, conduct frequent searches, arrests, and raids, and condone settler violence. The occupying power has recently approved and advanced the E1 settlement plan. This dangerous act gravely violates international law and Security Council resolutions, undermines the territorial contiguity of Palestine, and erodes the foundations of an independent Palestinian state. We call on Israel to immediately cease all settlement activities, curb settler violence, and lift restrictions on Palestinian economic activities. Third, we must rectify the historical injustices suffered by the Palestinian people. Israel has long established itself as an independent state. The Palestinian people, however, remain without a homeland. This is the root of the problem. The two-state solution as the only viable way to solve the Palestinian question is irreplaceable and must not be denied. Yesterday, the UNGA high-level international conference on a two-state solution once again issued a strong call in support of the two-state solution. a number of Western countries have recently recognized the state of Palestine one after another. The international community should sustain the current momentum, strive to revitalize the prospect for the two-state solution, and support the early establishment of an independent Palestinian state and its early admission as a full member state of the United Nations. Both Gaza and the West Bank are inalienable parts of the Palestinian territory. We must resolutely oppose unilateral actions that undermine the foundations of the two-state solution. Any day-after governance and reconstruction arrangements must respect the will of the Palestinian people and uphold the legitimate rights of the Palestinian nation. Fourth, we must maintain peace and stability in the Middle East. From the onset of the current Gaza conflict, there has been frequent abuse of force and military adventurism, which have triggered profound changes in the regional landscape. The Middle East is once again standing at historical crossroads: relaxation or escalation, dialogue or confrontation, peace or war. These are the choices that the regional countries and us, the international community, should make collectively. We call on all parties to effectively respect the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of countries in the Middle East. We call on Israel to earnestly respect the rights to survival and development of the people in the Middle East, and call on countries in the region to prioritize long-term peace and security, uphold the vision of common security, resolve differences through inclusiveness, address conflicts through dialogue, come together to shape a regional order based on equity and justice, and jointly build a future of peaceful development in the region. President, China always upholds fairness and justice on the Palestinian question and always firmly supports the just cause of the Palestinian people. Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward in succession the Global Security Initiative and the Global Governance Initiative, contributing a Chinese plan to resolve conflicts and hotspot issues, maintain international peace and multilateralism, and enhance global governance. This also provides important guidance for addressing Middle East issues. Guided by these initiatives, China is committed to working with the international community to promote a ceasefire, alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe, implement the two-state solution, and ultimately achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question, so that both Palestinians and Israelis may live in peace and happiness, and the Middle East may embrace a future of lasting peace, stability, and shared prosperity. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the Secretary General for his report on the situation in the Gaza Strip. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of the foreign ministers of regional states and relevant international organizations. The crisis in Gaza, whose scale in terms of civilian casualties has surpassed any conflict in recent decades, has led to escalation throughout the entire region, with violent flare-ups in a number of neighboring countries. In this context, we understand the desire of our Middle Eastern partners to speak out on this urgent issue that directly affects each of them. Colleagues, in recent weeks, a number of major developments have taken place at the UN regarding the Middle East, clearly reflecting growing solidarity among the international community regarding the fact that what is happening in Gaza due to Israel's actions, regardless of the justifications for those actions, is unacceptable and cannot continue. Last Thursday, 14 members of the Council voted in favor of a draft resolution demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the release of all hostages held by Hamas, the lifting of the severe humanitarian blockade of Gaza, and the provision of safe and unhindered access to those in need. Unfortunately, the United States blocked that resolution, using its veto for the 7th time on this issue. A little earlier, however, the Council did manage to agree on a statement, albeit a very general one, condemning Israel's attack on the sovereign state of Qatar. The UN has so far failed to stop the bloodshed in Gaza or to compel Israel to return to the path of a two-state solution. However, over the past 2 days during the international conference at the General Assembly, important symbolic steps have been taken, with a number of countries recognizing Palestinian statehood. This is a belated but extremely important signal to Israel's military and political leadership, a signal that justice for the Palestinian people must be restored. Sadly, it took nearly 2 years of Israeli operations in Gaza and over 65,000 civilian Palestinian deaths for this to happen. Recognition of the Palestinian state is not a favor to Ramallah. It is a historic duty owed to the Palestinian people, one that should have been fulfilled nearly 80 years ago. Russia has been calling for this for decades. Let me remind you that the USSR recognized the state of Palestine back in 1988. Israel, however, not only remains deaf to the appeals of the international community, but, encouraged by its American allies, responds with threats, claiming that the wave of new recognitions of Palestinian statehood is allegedly a reward to Hamas for the October 7th terrorist attack. In West Jerusalem, there is open talk of formally annexing the West Bank following the high-level week. That is why a clear signal must be sent now that such steps are unacceptable. We must certainly not give in to any threats of retaliatory measures. As the Secretary General said, only our actions can put an end to what is happening. Colleagues, the international community's united support for the Palestinian people's aspirations to live peacefully in their own state is the momentum we must collectively build. We must work to translate into practical reality. The main task right now is to ensure that the crisis in Gaza is resolved not through brutal facts on the ground, in other words, by completely clearing out all Palestinians, which is the aim of Israelis' leadership, nor through their displacement from the enclave and its commercial redevelopment, as proposed by various radical Western plans. Rather, this must be done through humane, civilized diplomacy that unites efforts within the UN and regionally among Arab states seeking to help their Palestinian brothers and sisters. Palestinians are not the object of social experiments. They are a people with the same right to sovereign existence and development as our own nations. But diplomatic efforts of any kind will only succeed if Israeli authorities abandon their reliance on military solutions. They must recognize that this approach will bring nothing good for Israel itself, which simply cannot develop and live in security in the context of a military operation on all fronts. The second key element is for Washington to recognize all this as well and stop viewing UN fora and multilateral diplomacy as an enemy that supposedly obstructs American diplomacy on the ground. Unfortunately, what we currently see is the exact opposite. Both Israel and the United States continue to claim that West Jerusalem is acting humanely in its fight against terrorism. This is how official Israeli reports justify strikes on hospitals and schools, attacks on humanitarian convoys, and the deaths of women, children, and aid workers. Hate speech and propaganda bring ordinary Israeli soldiers to kill dozens of innocent Palestinian civilians daily, sincerely believing that this is all for the greater good of the Israeli state. In this way, for nearly 2 years, West Jerusalem has been systematically constructing and imposing a distorted narrative in which Palestinians are second-class people who can be exterminated, displaced, starved, and killed even directly at humanitarian aid distribution points. UN leadership, its humanitarian bodies, and even member states calling for a ceasefire and humanitarian access are unabashedly labeled by Israeli representatives as terrorist accomplices. This radical, distorted rhetoric, along with West Jerusalem's clear intent to continuously escalate the situation in the region, a situation that is already drawn in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Qatar, undermines any progress towards a peaceful resolution of the Middle East crisis. The Israeli strike on Doha, one of the key mediators in negotiations, clearly demonstrated that Israel is not aiming for diplomacy, but rather for endless war, even at the cost of the remaining hostages who, with this war, are left with no chance of survival. it is also clear that Israel's strategic endgame is to take full control of all Palestinian territory, both Gaza and the West Bank. Annexation plans are discussed openly, not only without hesitation, but with pride and a sense of fulfilling a historic mission. And these are not just empty words. Gaza is being systematically cleared, carved up into so-called security zones that shrink by the day. The West Bank is being built up with new Israeli settlements, and fanatical settlers in the world's worst traditions of the colonialism of past centuries abuse the Palestinian population and drive them from their homelands as the authorities stand by and do nothing. An aggressive settlement policy is being actively implemented, one where Palestinians are at best relegated to the role of ghetto residents and at worst to exiles. Mr. President, this picture of horrifying injustice, violence, and trampling of human dignity unfolding in the occupied Palestinian territory is a call to action. This is what hundreds of thousands of people around the world are demanding from us in the street. An end to the senseless bloodshed in Gaza and the liberation of Palestine. This is also what Israeli hostages and their families are demanding as they protest in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities, calling for a comprehensive deal to release prisoners and end the fighting. No one wants war, not ordinary Palestinians nor ordinary Israelis. This heartfelt plea was voiced by Israeli citizen Galit Dan, whose daughter and mother were killed on October 7th. She said, "I don't want revenge, I want hope in the name of those who have lost everything and those who can still be saved. Please stop the war." End of quote. Mr. President, we believe in the power of multilateral diplomacy. Although it has not always succeeded, over the 80 years of the UN's existence, it has been thanks to this diplomacy that the planet has avoided a third world war. We're confident that it can also help resolve the long-standing Middle East crisis. This requires the collective will of the international community, expressed not only in declarations from high rostrums, but in concrete actions. We strongly urge our American colleagues to cast aside their rigid positions and engage in the real efforts that the UN Security Council must undertake in accordance with its mandate to maintain international peace and security. This will only benefit your closest ally, whose security cannot be ensured by force alone. The fact that such an approach is a dead end has been proven by decades of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is time to recognize that only a diplomatic settlement of the Palestinian issue based on the two-state solution can guarantee lasting peace in the Middle East, security for Israeli citizens, and the just aspirations of the Palestinian people for their own state. Otherwise, endless and senseless bloodshed will continue, claiming ever more civilian lives, sowing discord between new generations of Arabs and Israelis, and destroying any prospects that they might one day coexist peacefully and develop freely. This must not be allowed. We trust that other reasonable members of the international community share this view. We stand ready to work with them to finally make a peaceful and prosperous Middle East a reality. This is a historic responsibility of the UN, its Security Council, and each and every one of us. We urge that it be fulfilled. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the State of Palestine.
Allow me at the outset to thank the Korean presidency of the Security Council for convening this important meeting, and to thank the OIC countries, members of the Council, for requesting this meeting to highlight the horrific situation in Gaza as world leaders meet here in New York. I also want to thank the high-level representatives participating in this meeting. Allow me to also thank Secretary General Guterres for his relentless efforts and his very moving and inspiring statements in these past 2 days and through him, we wish to extend Palestine's gratitude to the entire United Nations and its personnel on the ground, with remembrance of those who were killed while trying to save lives in the midst of this genocide. Mr. President, we just adopted a declaration on protection of humanitarian personnel on the North Lawn Sunday afternoon. This Council has adopted resolutions on protection of civilians, including children and women and humanitarians and journalists. In Gaza, not only do they not benefit from protection, they are primary targets of the Israeli onslaught. Mr. President, the Palestinian people have suffered from the denial of their existence for decades. Now they are being confronted yet again with an attempt to destroy our nation altogether. Recognition of the State of Palestine is an affirmation that the world rejects such denial, rejects the attempts at our destruction, and supports our right to existence, our right to self-determination. And that is not a gift, this is a right, and the Palestinian people have been struggling for almost 100 years for the attainment of such a right. It was not born recently. It is also a clear indication that the international community refuses to abandon the rule of international law and refuses to abandon the two-state solution, the only path to regional peace and security. This recognition is not taking place in a vacuum. It is an integral part of the international mobilization to end this horrific war and move towards peace. The New York Declaration adopted in the General Assembly by the historic high-level international conference co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France charts a clear path to the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine, living side by side in peace and security with Israel based on the relevant UN resolutions. And while all eyes were turned towards New York yesterday, as President Macron took to the podium to announce the historic decision to recognize the State of Palestine alongside other countries, including the United Kingdom, all minds and hearts were turned towards Gaza. Ending the genocide in Gaza is the utmost priority, one that can suffer no delay, one that requires resolute action. Only an immediate ceasefire can save lives, the lives of 2 million Palestinians, children, women, and men, the lives of 20 Israeli hostages. The slaughter must stop. The destruction must stop. The occupation-made famine must be brought to an end without delay. Israel must fully withdraw its forces, and the Palestinian people should have freedom and dignity. We support the mediation efforts by the US, Egypt, and Qatar, and condemn yet again the Israeli strike on the territory of Qatar, a key mediator, as it was convening a meeting to advance a ceasefire agreement and this never-ending regional escalation. Mr. President, nothing justifies delaying such a ceasefire that is the only way to stop the bloodshed, release the hostages and prisoners and human remains, and allow unhindered humanitarian access. We need decisive actions to deter the prolongation and escalation of this war, and we thank the countries who have undertaken such measures. The Council has a sacred mandate in this regard that it has been prevented from honoring. I thank Algeria and the E10 for relentless efforts and for putting forward last week a draft resolution to yet again pursue such an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. And I thank the 14 members of this Council who supported such a draft resolution that was blocked by a veto. Mr. President, the New York Declaration foresees the deployment of an international stabilization mission upon invitation by Palestine and mandated by the Security Council to protect the Palestinian people, uphold the ceasefire, support the Palestinian National Authority security forces, and provide security guarantees to all. This must be supported. The Gaza Strip must be reunified with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority as reaffirmed repeatedly by this Council. We call for your support to our policy of one Palestinian state, one Palestinian government, one law, and one gun. The Arab OIC reconstruction plan must be implemented without delay. Our people urgently need recovery, need food, water, medicine, and care, need shelter, need healing. We are ready to work with the international community, with the United Nations, leading humanitarian efforts, including UNRWA, to make this happen. We are ready to work with the U.S. administration. Our President reiterated that yesterday in the General Assembly, and I will not react to the falsification of our record by the new PR, the new ambassador of the United States. We will work with this administration, with Saudi Arabia, and regional actors, France and international partners, and the members of this Council to advance these goals for peace. Mr. President, Palestinians are not lesser beings. We are entitled to life and liberty and dignity. The horrors inflicted by Israel upon our people in Gaza can have no justification. Colonization and occupation have no justification. We are not condemned to live under perpetual occupation, nor are Palestinians and Israelis are condemned to perpetual war. We are committed to peace in words and deeds, and we will honor our obligations. But Israel must also be made to respect its obligations. It is not only one-way street. No genocide, no dispossession, no forcible displacement, no colonization, no annexation, no occupation. A change in long overdue and sea change we are seeing across the world in support of Palestinian self-determination and independence, in support of peace and security, must lead to a fundamental change on the ground. Save Gaza, save Palestine, save peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jonas Gahr Støre, Prime Minister of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have requested to speak in order to make three essential points about the horror that we are witnessing in Palestine. So let me address them. First, we join others in expressing our deepest concern about Israel's expanded military campaign ongoing in Gaza as we meet. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire, drastically improved humanitarian access, and the unconditional release of remaining hostages. Second, while this crisis requires immediate action, it is just as important to lay the foundations now for the day after the war and for the end to the conflict. As the conference yesterday made clear, the overwhelming majority of member states of the United Nations consider the two-state solution
the only credible basis for peace in the Middle East. Peace for Israelis and peace for Palestinians. Mr. President, my capital city, Oslo, is in many ways synonymous with those efforts thanks to the Oslo Accords that created the Palestinian Authority back in 1993. Ever since, my country has worked towards one goal: peace, security, and dignity for the Palestinians and the Israelis, living side by side in two sovereign states, enjoying the rights and obligations that follow from the Charter of the United Nations. Norway recognized the State of Palestine in May last year. That was a hand to those on both sides who seek peaceful solution. And I need to say on behalf of those who recognized Palestine yesterday, doing so is turning the back on terror. It is turning the back on Hamas. It is taking the voice away from them and handing it to the peaceful part of the Palestinian overwhelming majority who want to live with rights and obligation under the Charter. Our decision reflected a realization that the old approach, waiting for a negotiated outcome before we recognize, was no longer a feasible option. One party simply refused to engage and to veto progress, and we cannot live with that. So let this be clear: a Palestinian state has been part of the vision for decades. Today we are far from realizing it on the ground. But the international support for and recognition of the State of Palestine is gaining momentum. The majority is growing. And I commend France and Saudi Arabia for arranging the historic session in the General Assembly yesterday. This week, 2 additional permanent members of the Security Council declared it is time. Which brings me to my third point, Mr. President. Let us use this momentum also to mobilize necessary financial support, to support the Palestinian authorities with necessary reforms, to implement the roadmap that was agreed in the General Assembly on September 12th, and to resume meaningful engagement and decisive peace talks. Norway will host, as we do every year, a ministerial meeting of the International Donor Group for Palestine, the AHLC, in New York this week. As stated by Prime Minister Mustafa, the severe lack of funds represents an existential and immediate threat to Palestine state building. Together with a broad group of countries, we are working to raise emergency funding for that Palestinian government. We encourage all member states to contribute. And we continue to call on Israel to release tax revenues owed to Palestine. This is Palestinian value creation being held and kept away, and that has to end. There will be no state of Palestine or a body to govern Gaza the day after the war ends without a functioning, reformed, and legitimate Palestinian Authority. That is critical for peace and security in the region, including for Israel, Mr. President. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Steria for the statement. I now give the floor to His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Khaled Al-Hamad Al-Mubarak Al-Sabah, the Crown Prince of the State of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the GCC member states, which are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Sultanate of Oman, the State of Qatar, and my country, the State of Kuwait. At the outset, we thank the countries of the OIC for asking for this urgent session. And we also thank the Republic of Korea, which is presiding over the Council this month, for convening this session at this critical moment. Mr. President, we are meeting today while the tragedy in Gaza has been going on for more than 2 years. The brave and defenseless Palestinian people are facing an unfair blockade, huge devastation. They have lost thousands of innocent civilians, the numbers of which have exceeded 60,000 martyrs, mostly women and children. What is happening is the Gaza Strip is the living example of genocide and ethnic cleansing. It is a bleeding wound in the conscience of humanity that cannot be left unanswered. We have been following with great concern the recent military escalation, and we strongly condemn the Israeli attacks against the brotherly state of Qatar. And we unambiguously affirm that any violation of the security of any Gulf state is an attack against all the GCC countries. Our security is one, our stance is one, and our destiny is one. Mr. President, just and lasting peace in our region cannot prevail unless through the two-state solution based on the resolutions of the international legitimacy and mostly the Security Council resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. This is the only path to end occupation and to guarantee the rights of the Palestinian people, the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, and the establishment of their independent state along the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. I warn against attempts to undermine this solution or bypass it through the policies of settlement, displacement, and imposing a fait accompli. The international community, and particularly the Security Council, are requested to shoulder all their responsibilities to prevent the ongoing violations and to guarantee the accountability of the perpetrators and to guarantee that the Palestinian people can exercise their inalienable right to self-determination. In this context, we welcome the recognition by some countries of the State of Palestine yesterday in the high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. These are welcomed and courageous actions that are in line with international law and in line with rights. In conclusion, the GCC member states reaffirm their steadfast solidarity with the Palestinian people. We stand by all countries that are being aggressed, and at the same time, we would like to emphasize that these crimes are not only against the Palestinians, they present a threat to regional and international security. We call upon this Council to translate its words into deeds through tangible steps to end the aggression immediately and to guarantee the immediate humanitarian access, to protect civilians, to put an end to the illegal, unjust occupation. Otherwise, we will never know security and stability. Our utmost goal today and every day is peace. The blood of the Palestinian people have been shed enough, and the soul of innocents have been killed. We cannot remain silent anymore, and it is up to the international community to shoulder this responsibility and to chart a course conducive to the two-state solution. May the peace of God be upon you.
I thank His Highness Sheikh Al-Sabah for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abulgate, Secretary General of the League of Arab States.
Mr. President, it has become clear that the Israeli war machine cannot be stopped with appeals alone. The leaders of occupation, intoxicated by racist illusions and religious extremism and extremist nationalism, have been stripped from all humanity and morality. What is required is strict punitive measures that convey the right message, which is that the world today does not accept that genocide be part of its vocabulary. We deeply regret the failure of this Council time and again, and most recently, a few days ago, to put an end to the genocidal war waged by Israel on Gaza. This war that has lost even its military logic, if it ever had such a logic. The use by a permanent member of the Security Council of the veto right for the sixth time to prevent the adoption of a resolution that puts an immediate end to war emboldens the leaders of the occupation to continue perpetrating crimes and horrors indefinitely. What Gaza is witnessing is unprecedented in its barbarity and brutality. But its objectives are now clear. The goal is to erase the Palestinian community from existence and to displace the population outside the Strip after rendering the place uninhabitable. I say clearly that yielding to this plan, to this brutal and insane plan, deprives this Council of much of its legitimacy. It undermines its role in preserving international peace and security. What is happening in Gaza will not remain confined in Gaza, and the plan carried out by Israel relentlessly to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and to displace its inhabitants will destabilize security in the entire region. It will expand the circle of conflict, and it will create ongoing hotspots of tension and violence. It is time for this Council to make the right decision, morally and practically, to end this war that has entered the realm of madness and which has no logic anymore except blind revenge against 2 million Palestinians, most of whom are women and children. Let us end this war today. Let us start immediately to rebuild Gaza. Let us return the children of Gaza who have been out of school for 2 years. Let us return them to their deserved childhood. These words are quoted from the Foreign Minister of the UK. Let us return this cause to its true path, which is the two-state solution that has no alternative in order to establish a lasting peace and to end the cycles of violence. Violence will recur inevitably in the future if the logic of blind revenge prevails, a revenge that is racially motivated. We say loudly, Mr. President, enough. End the bloodshed and the killing that have stained our collective humanity. This is the responsibility of this Council before history. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abdel-Gate for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission.
Dear President, Excellencies, if a military solution were possible in Gaza, Israel's war on Hamas would already be over, and the hostages would have been released. Instead, the war continues and the famine has set in, a famine that was avoidable had aid been let in. We have a collective responsibility to change this situation. And so I repeat here the calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and humanitarian aid into Gaza at scale. Europe has been the most active global actor in Gaza. We are the largest humanitarian donor. We have helped the Palestinians more than any other. We negotiated with the Israeli government a humanitarian understanding with specific benchmarks. Since then, more trucks have entered Gaza, more aid was delivered, the Jordanian and Egyptian routes were reopened, and repairs to critical infrastructure were carried out. In August, a ship carrying 1,200 tons of aid departed from Limassol, Cyprus. Further shipments will continue. But we all know it's not enough. That is why European Union is pulling other levers to try and push the Israeli government to change its course of action. We recently proposed sanctions on extremist ministers in the Israeli government, sanctions on violent settlers in the West Bank and entities supporting their impunity, additional sanctions on Hamas terrorists, and the suspension of trade concessions with Israel. This is a message to current Israeli government: change course and address the humanitarian suffering. In addition, another fundamental question hangs over us: how to square Israel's legitimate right to live in safety and security with the future Palestinian state. We have always believed that there is one answer: two states side by side. As we saw during yesterday's conference, the weight of the world is behind the two-state solution. The European Union has worked hard to make this possible. The European Union is also the leading supporter of the Palestinian Authority. We will provide 1.6 billion euro over the next 3 years. We also kept Palestinian institutions functioning during this war, including education. We have now launched a forum to finance the future for the Palestinian people, the Palestine Donor Forum. And the Global Alliance remains the best mechanism for the discussions on how to turn commitments into actions. There must be a turning point in this war, and it cannot be in the expense of either the viability of a Palestinian state or the legitimate concerns of Israel. We have the power to change the course of this conflict, to see the release of remaining hostages, to prevent further civilian suffering, and see an end to this war. Thank you.
Her Excellency Ms. Kallas for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nu Ilmaz, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am delivering this statement on behalf of Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member states belonging to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as the chair of the group. Mr. President, let me express our appreciation to you for convening this meeting, which is taking place at a very auspicious occasion of the 80th annual session of the UN General Assembly. There is no doubt that the unprecedented crisis and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including Al-Quds al-Sharif, has further deteriorated with the continued Israeli onslaught against Palestinian people. Prior to the recent official confirmation of the Israeli genocide in the occupied Palestinian territory by the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry, the OIC group has also decried the unprecedented humanitarian consequences of the long-drawn Israeli military onslaught in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory. It has also invited the attention of this hallowed council to the dangerous escalation of the war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by the Israeli occupying power against the Palestinian people through the systematic targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, including the siege on, disruption of, and attack on food supply chains, water and medical facilities, among others. We note that the actions of the Israeli occupying power amount to ethnic cleansing, illegal blockade, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, and colonial settlement and apartheid policies, acts of settler colonialism and terrorism. Land confiscation and home demolition, including attacks on Islamic and Christian holy sites, are acts of genocide and crimes against humanity and constitute a grave violation of the historic status quo at the holy sites of Jerusalem. Consequently, we reaffirm the decision of the 21st Extraordinary Council of foreign ministers held in Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, on 25 August 2025 on the significance of the case presented to the International Court of Justice on Israel's violation of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We, therefore, call on the Council to take the urgent measures to hold Israel accountable for these genocidal acts, including invoking Chapter 7 measures to bring a halt to the bloodshed and all of these crimes and to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, while we had earlier condemned the Israeli military attack against Qatar on 9 September 2025, we consider the unjustified and illegal action on the part of the Israeli authorities as a desperate move to frustrate the global efforts to achieve a ceasefire and an end of the siege in Palestine. We commend the declaration by Qatar on the continuation of its mediation efforts, along with Egypt, towards securing a permanent, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. Consequently, we support the urgent implementation of the Arab OIC reconstruction plan to allow for early recovery and reconstruction in the Gaza Strip, while rejecting forced displacement and ensuring that the Palestinian people remain in their land, and we encourage all member states to participate actively in the international conference in Cairo aimed at mobilizing political and financial support for the plan. In the same vein, we commend member states of the United Nations and the citizenry of the world for their overwhelming support for the legitimate cause of the Palestinian people, for their inalienable rights, including to return to self-determination, to the independence of the State of Palestine, and the implementation of the two-state solution. To this end, we hail the recent adoption of the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution through an overwhelming vote at the General Assembly on 12 September 2025, and commend actions by many states towards the recognition of the State of Palestine and bringing an end to this illegal occupation and ensuring the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and the achievement of a just and lasting solution. We reiterate that the time has come for the Council to assume its duties for the maintenance of international peace and security, including by approving the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. We reiterate that the pathway to the resolution of the prolonged and historic injustice is the restoration of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to their national homeland, the implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion, as well as the relevant UN resolutions on question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. That is the key to peace and security in the Middle East and in our world. I thank you all.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Yilmaz for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the President of the Security Council, the members of the Security Council, we would like to welcome the briefing of the Secretary General today before the Council. We would like to express our gratitude to his tireless efforts to bring peace in the region. From the very first day, Egypt attempted to end the war in the Gaza Strip. We are convinced that pushing the situation out of control will plunge the region into an unprecedented phase of instability. The days have proved that our theory was correct. The efforts to put an end to this war have been countered by the Israeli intransigence more than one time. And we did not reach any point where we can put an end to this bloodshed or this war. Israeli intentions toward Gaza and the Palestinian cause are no longer hidden. Israeli statements and moves unravel a genuine attempt to re-engineer the Palestinian presence in Gaza. This includes the displacement of a large portion of the population through military operations, starvation, and the elimination of livelihood in Gaza. The current ground military operation to storm Gaza City is only part of this subversive scheme. Egypt affirms its total rejection to this plan and its consequences. Such measures lack any legal or moral basis. It threatens the peace that has existed for almost 5 decades in a way unimaginable as to its effects on all the countries of the region. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip has reached catastrophic stages. This is due to the numerous obstacles placed by Israel to impede the entry of aid, impede the work of UNRWA and other UN and humanitarian organizations working inside the Strip. These measures led to an unprecedented tragic situation. It pushed the people of Gaza towards the brink of famine. The findings of the report of the United Nations International Independent Commission of Inquiry were conclusive. It confirmed that Israel committed genocide. They proved that its material and moral elements against civilians were definitely committed in the Gaza Strip. In the face of such catastrophic situation, Egypt adopted great wisdom. It was not dragged into any narratives or arguments or towards paths that would lead to further escalation or deterioration. Instead, it tried to avoid any provocation because we were certain that the ceasefire is the first step required to launch a political pathway that would diffuse the crisis. It will allow the beginning of serious discussions on the future of Gaza and the future of the entire Palestinian cause. Egypt is intent to continue its effort with all mediators to achieve this noble goal. Mr. President, Egypt also intends to host a conference on the early recovery and reconstruction in the Gaza Strip as soon as a ceasefire is reached. This will mobilize the necessary support for the implementation of the Arab OIC plan for the reconstruction of Gaza by Palestinian hands. It will also counter any plans for displacement. Our main task must be the enablement of the national decision to carry out the administration of the Strip in a way that will preserve the unity of the Palestinian territory from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank. This should also include the occupied East Jerusalem, all under one authority, one government, one law, and one weapon. Mr. President, Excellencies, members of the Council, it has been certain to all that the security arrangements on the ground and ending the current catastrophic situation in Gaza, as well as the reconstruction, are inevitable and necessary steps. They cannot be achieved practically on the ground unless there is a political horizon towards a comprehensive and just settlement of the Palestinian cause based on the two-state solution. It has to also include the establishment of the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital along the lines of the 4th of June 1967. This must be accompanied by genuine international will that supports peace and stability in the Middle East.
I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Mariam bint Ali bin Nasser Al Misnad, Minister of State for International Cooperation of Qatar.
السيد الرئيس، في البداية نعرب عن شكرنا لسعادة وزير خارجية.
President, first of all, we'd like to thank the Foreign Affairs Minister of the Republic of Korea for convening this meeting, and we'd like to thank the Secretary General for his briefing. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by by the OIC. There is a consensus now on the issue of the two-state solution under international law. This has been borne out in the statements delivered by presidents and heads of state and government during the general debate, and also during the ministerial conference, which was held on Monday and was co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. Qatar participated at the highest level. Many states recognized there the state of Palestine. This is international momentum to resolve the outstanding issues on the UN's agenda. And this also concerns the resolution on Palestine's participation. We would hope that the Council will join this consensus through the resolution that the E10 have put forward. The Council has the responsibility to take the necessary measures so as to end the human disaster in Gaza. That is to say, genocide and forced displacement, and to adopt a binding resolution under Chapter 7 so that Israel is compelled to accept an immediate ceasefire. President, it is clear that mediation and diplomacy are the best ways to resolve conflicts. Efforts undertaken by Qatar, alongside Egypt and the United States of America, have been broadly welcomed. The Council, in its resolution, has declared the importance of these efforts. However, these efforts have been thwarted by Israel's attack on a residential zone in Doha in Qatar, where civilians lived, civilians and expatriates. During this attack, a member of our domestic security forces, aged 22, was killed, and several other people were injured in this attack. This is a blatant violation of our sovereignty and also international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. This is a direct attack on international law as a way of resolving conflicts. Mediators need to be protected. This is not a political issue. This is a basic principle to uphold security. International solidarity with Qatar has been clear. There has been a communication issued by the Security Council, but also from the Doha Ministerial Conference, which said that this attack has undermined efforts to achieve peace. Israel is violating IHL in Palestinian territories, and systematically. Starvation has been used as a weapon. Hospitals and schools have also been targeted. There is also the threat to illegally annex the West Bank. There are also attacks on places of worship. These are all major violations of international law and a threat to the two-state solution. In addition, we are seeing further measures taken by Israel in Syria and Lebanon. This undermines security and is in danger of escalating the conflict. It is therefore this Council's responsibility to maintain peace and security, because peace will only be achieved in the Middle East if the Arab Peace Initiative is respected, as well as the relevant resolutions of this Council. We call on the international community, notably this Council, to shoulder this responsibility, this ethical responsibility, and take measures to put an end to Israel's occupation, to fully recognize Palestine within the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. All mechanisms need to be used to achieve an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and also to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid, to lift the blockade and to protect all mediators. We also need to do our utmost to ensure the two-state solution is preserved. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Nad for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Saudi Arabia.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you. The Gaza Strip is suffering from a catastrophic situation that is deteriorating day by day on all levels due to an unprecedented military escalation and an absence of any effective political horizon. This led to a collapse of all the elements of life and security. The continued onslaught and the siege imposed for years made the Strip a central hot spot that is a threat to the stability of the entire region. It's a real danger to peace and security in the region and the world. The repeated aggressions and Israeli violations that run counter to the principles of international law and the UN Charter and the most basic international norms was solely the result of the lack of accountability and the prevalence of impunity and the failure of the Security Council and the international community to deter the aggressor and stop their violations. This has reached a dangerous turn that portends to erase the national sovereignty. It threatens the credibility of this organization and the basics of international legitimacy. It undermines diplomatic and negotiated solutions. It is a real danger to the security of the region and the world. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we have clarified the dangerous situation in Gaza before your august council and the repercussions of the aggressive approach of the Israeli authorities in the Middle East. They are continuing to expand this regional conflict over the past years. They are pushing the countries of the region to the brink of a dark path that is surrounded by absurdity, hatred, and wars at the expense of peace and security and coexistence among their peoples. And we are still witnessing the repercussions of the lack of any firm measures to deter the Israeli violations, how they are trampling on the principles of laws and norms governing the international community, their continued unilateral expansion of such measures unabated. Is it acceptable that they target the territory of the sisterly country of Qatar, violating its sovereignty as they are undertaking coercive effort to mediate to end the war? What we have been seeing time and again is the intransigence of the Israeli party to block the path to find a peaceful solution, to put an end to the bloodshed, to the suffering of the civilians. They only want the region to continue witnessing this continued escalation and the scourge of war. Before this truth, we reiterate our calls that this council must shoulder its responsibilities for which it was established. We have to invoke the international deterrent measures of accountability against this Israeli behavior to maintain regional and international peace and security and ensure the credibility of this international regime and its legitimacy. The serious and immediate international move is a necessity that cannot be delayed. We have to put an end to this aggression and this siege. We have to pave the way for comprehensive and just peace. This will come through the implementation of the two-state solution and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the lines of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President. Peace and blessings of God be upon you.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia for the statement. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Mr. President, I must take the floor to respond to my Palestinian colleagues' comments. As Ambassador Waltz noted, the Palestinian Authority has failed to meet its own Oslo commitments to renounce terrorism and violence, and to resolve issues through direct negotiations with Israel. These are not falsehoods, but facts. We call on the Palestinian Authority to halt its pushes for the unilateral recognition of statehood. Instead, they must focus on actions that will not empower Hamas, but rather create a better future for the people of Palestine. We reiterate again that all hostages, living and deceased, must be released immediately. Thank you.
Representative of the United States. There are no more names inscribed on the list of the speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Good planning, 3 hours.